So a little bit about the panelists here. So my name is Meredith Gershenson. I am a research analyst at workforce.com. My job is really just to deliver workforce management information through webinars, case studies, white papers, and everything that we have here and has just been said can be found on our website as well. So today we are joined by Ben at Hash and workforce.com's very own Bo. So without further ado, Ben, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Thanks, Meredith. And hi, everyone. I'm Ben. I lead our simulation engineering efforts at Hash. Hash is a simulation software company. So we build simulation software to help people and organizations make decisions through better modeling. And I'm excited to chat about applying it to employee retention and employee scheduling. And I'm dialing in from San Diego, so not the Northeast, but maybe slightly warmer.
Maybe just a little bit. Cool. And my name is Bo. I'm an analytics specialist at Workforce, focusing a lot on macroeconomic trends and how it affects your businesses. So exciting stuff. Ben and I had the chance to connect before this, so I think it should be a good conversation.
Before we get started, we do have a poll question right off the bat for you guys. So what topics do you want to see next for these webinars to come? We have anything from scheduling, employee retention, time and attendance, compliance, and lowering labor costs. So feel free to cast your vote in the poll section.
Cool. So before we get started to talk about how we're going to optimize scheduling with predictive modeling, I think it's important for us to understand the situation that we're in. The biggest way that we can do that is starting on a macro level. People have been dubbing this stage in our economy the great resignation of 2021, which I think is a really accurate and great way to talk about the immense turnover that we've experienced in the labor market. Primarily given to post-COVID working citizens, there's been a lot of calls for more flexibility, more fulfilling jobs, the more travel, money, things like this that are kind of getting people to a point where they're reconsidering their current employment and they're out there looking for more. We got to this unbalanced labor market via a lot of fiscal stimuli and an interesting surge in these sales within hospitality industries, amongst others. So you can see in the graph in figure 11, we're seeing a lot of disparity. If you look at 2010 compared to 2020, we're almost half of what we did in terms of fiscal stimuli during the World War II era. So we're seeing a lot of money that's pumping into the economy. So a lot of people have, been disincentivized to work. And now as the economy has ramped up and we've seen that increase in sales, we need more people to be working, but there's not a lot of motivation to do so. So I think we also have a poll going up right now asking, has your business experienced this unbalance? So far, we're at 100% for yeses, still at 100. So very interesting that everybody coming in so far is experiencing this.
Yeah.
So. On a large business scale, Chipotle is one of the best examples. They've been scrambling to try and hire people and to meet their laboring needs. They actually have a goal right now of 20,000 employees to be onboarded by September 2021. So the way that they've been trying to accomplish that is increasing wages up to $15 an hour. And to counteract that cost, they're increasing their menu prices by at least 4%. So basically, Chipotle is in the situation where they're increasing costs, they're increasing the expenses on their customers. And we're kind of in this situation where, we're constrained in our resources. And so with constrained resources, we basically need to get a better understanding and utilize better tools to optimize that employee scheduling. So
we see this too, in a lot of industries, even outside hospitality and restaurants. Even with nurses, RNs, you see a lot of, and even pertaining to this slide, a lot of burnout, which leads to them having a push in work-life balance principles and higher benefits.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So other things that contribute, again, slow vaccination rates, childcare, as we have, had a year of being at home, utilizing different childcare opportunities at home. Now that we're moving back to offices, going back to restaurants and things, we need to better capitalize on our childcare. So with that being said, I can go ahead and kick it over to Ben, who can talk more about how we're going to utilize technology for that predictive modeling and better optimize our employee scheduling.
I think you described the challenges well under the tagline of constraints. When thinking about these types of problems, it's really important to identify what constraints you're facing either at a micro level in your individual business or at a macro level within the general environment that you're operating in. And so that's where kind of predictive modeling, which is a very broad term, and maybe we can dive into some definitions, but where predictive modeling comes in, a technique or an approach for helping think through what your constraints are and how to maximize, or depending on the goal, minimize a target metric in light of those constraints. So kind of getting back to basics almost, when we're talking about modeling, what we're really talking about is just creating abstractions, creating simplified representations of the real world to help in solving a given problem. And the predictive element comes in from trying to look not just at the current world, not just the world that you're in now, but the what if scenarios. What is going to happen to my business, or in this case, my workforce, given certain conditions or certain constraints?
Right.
Yeah, exactly. And so this might all sound a little obvious, but it's useful when thinking through the actual challenge that somebody in a business might be facing when it comes to hiring or retaining a labor force, which is a number of different goals. You might be trying to think about under a certain condition where we have N number of employees leave the business, what's going to happen to my ability to meet demand, to staff under certain hours? How can I explore all these different scenarios and make sure that you're making a robust plan for those conditions? And that is where I think computer-aided predictive modeling can come in handy. Workforce.com has already been doing a fair bit of this. We've happy to pass over to y'all to talk a little bit more about the features there. But I was pleasantly surprised when we were initially chatting about some of the initial forecasting stuff that you can do already. And I think that that's a cool demonstration of the abilities to use computers to help think through problems. I feel like the default way that a lot of managers end up trying to meet the scheduling challenges is through pen and paper.
Right.
And there's always just going to be some limitations there. It's always going to put a lot more work on the individual manager or business owner trying to craft that schedule. And so the more that we can provide tools to help in that, I think the better.
Yeah, I think you touched something really good there in regards to how business owners and managers, they tend to really understand, or at least have a concept of what problems they're facing. But without a lack of tools to help quantify that, it's hard to explain that and to make business decisions around it.
Totally.
So I think that's where a lot of that benefit comes from with, predictive modeling tools and
that's right.
Demand.
Because if it's a small business, then I think that you're tool constrained, because there's just tool and bandwidth constrained, because there's just so many different constraints on your own time that trying to spend a week thinking through the optimal schedule is just not feasible. And if you're a larger business, there's that other point that you're talking about, which is interpretability and getting people on board with the plan, where it's not just then about you figuring out what the best thing is and telling people, all right, we're going to do A, B, and C. You also need to be able to demonstrate that in a way that brings everybody on board. And this has been something that when we've been talking with business owners and enterprises, this has been kind of a thing that's come up again and again, this kind of spectrum between, well, the smaller the business, the more constrained you are to think through these problems because you just have more things on your plate. And then the larger the business, the harder it is to get everybody aligned together, working in the same direction.
Sure, yeah. With siloed business models, it's difficult to understand the full scope of what the business is dealing
Exactly,
with.
yeah. And I like this discussion. I noticed I'm want to dive into another part of it, which is just this area around if you
Sure.
optimize any single local thing, you risk throwing off the kind of system level things, right? Like
100%.
yeah. And so I do think that's where kind of like general tools, whether it's like Workforce or other ones that like let everybody see the same picture, can really help on those alignment challenges. Yeah, and so I do think that the advantage of predictive modeling is something like, well, maybe we can bring computers and good data to bear to help aid the scheduling problem, and to bring it back to the thing that we're trying to tackle or we're talking about today in the webinar. I suspect, or I posit, that a lot of the employee retention problems come down to things related to incentives, right? Like incentives do matter, like being able to compete in the marketplace when there's less labor does mean like paying more, finding ways to make things better for employees. But also it comes down to being able to give people that kind of flexibility and that kind of schedule that's going to be good for the business and good for the employee. And if we can balance both of those requirements, those goals and constraints, then it's probably going to improve both employee morale and employee retention. And just to segue into the next slide, I think that kind of goal around optimization is what's useful in predictive modeling as it applies to workforce management. We kind of work together here on this slide around 4 different aspects of predictive modeling, how you can use it to help your business. And we move from the tactical to the strategic. So I'll go over these briefly. But the first is optimization. And that's like what it says on the tin, right? You have a goal that you're trying to maximize or minimize, and you're using models to help with finding out how different factors or different parameters end up maximizing or minimizing that goal. And to make that a little bit more concrete, it's things like, well, if I want to maximize my revenue or if I want to minimize downtime, then can we define what those constraints are, and can we run simulations to explore what would happen if we have a certain like number of employees or some other parameter. And yeah.
Even along the lines of mitigating risk for employee turnover.
Definitely.
Is another optimization.
Definitely, I think so. And these do kind of blend together, right? We touch a little bit on risk analysis as a third thing, but I think that there's like overlap, right? Where we want to, if one of the goals that we have is minimize the number of employees who quit in a given period of time, and if we expect that there are a number of factors that lead into that, then exploring the different scenarios and stress testing things and seeing, well, given an assumption that an employee is 10% more likely to quit if they have to work several weeks of overtime, well, then what kinds of schedules can we craft that would reduce that risk? That's the kind of risk analysis I think is really helpful when trying to manage a business at the level that we're talking about, at the strategic level. And yeah, just jumping around here a little bit, I think automation is going to come up less in this conversation, but it is an important part of building models where as your models get more sophisticated, you can start triggering actions directly from them, reducing the amount of human in the loop time that you need and making it a bit more robust. Just as an example, one of the things that I remember from my time working in people operations at Google was having certain triggers that would occur if a employee was hitting certain points in their tenure. I'm being a little vague because I realized as I was starting to give this anecdote that I'm not actually sure what I should or shouldn't say on this area, but I think it's kind of obvious what I'm talking about, which is just like, all right, well, if an employee has been around for a long time, one of the things that we can automate here is triggering certain benefits. We can trigger certain reminders to their managers. These are all little ways to make it easier to support the HR function. And doing that through automation. And then risk analysis and strategy and planning. This is what we were just talking about, which is, well, there are going to be certain risks when you're operating a business. And when it comes to the employee management side, are there ways that we can identify what kind of conditions would lead to higher turnover? Can we run simulations that would show 10% of the time we lose half of the workforce, or 90% of the time we're able to retain the majority of them? that all feeds into the strategy and planning aspect, which is when you're operating on a little bit of a longer time frame, when you're trying to plan your workforce for the next several months, years, thinking through the strategies that are going to enable you to hire and retain people in the right way. That's another area where modeling just becomes this input to your thought process.
Yeah, I know that, at least within our particular segment of assistance for businesses, we care a lot about our labor percentages. How much money of our revenue are we contributing to labor costs? And I think an interesting thing of predictive modeling is if you are trying to hover that around 35% of your revenue, if you change that in any way, put it to 25% or 45%, what kind of risks are you bringing up? And I feel like predictive modeling is a great way of trying to understand.
Yeah, I love that example because it's very quantified. And so you can play with this parameter and think, well, if I add another 10%, or if I shift my budget in a certain way where now I'm spending 45% of my total costs, 45% of it are going to labor, what do I get from that? But then also, outside of the immediate fiscal costs, like what are the other costs? Like, do I have more downtime because because I'm oversubscribed in the number of employees? So yeah, I think that's a really good example. And if you're trying to target on the long run, keeping it at a given percentage, that's a good goal to minimize the deviation from that target number.
Sure, yeah.
And we can jump to the next slide and get into a little bit more of a concrete example. So one thing that we did a little bit in prep for this conversation, but also just because we've had this request from a number of our users, was put together a demo simulation and a use case and blog post describing using predictive simulations for employee scheduling. So I've included a link in the presentation, but I'll just share this with the chat as well. Feel free to peruse it at your own time, at your leisure. But the basic idea is building a simulation that allows you to input using workforce.com style data or whatever your own representation of your schedule is if you're not using Workforce, but using this type of data to create simulations that model your schedule under different demand conditions. And this goes back to what we were talking about just a few minutes ago, which is you can think about the modeling problem as having these series of constraints. Like I have a certain number of employees, each one costs a certain amount per hour, and then trying to target a specific goal to get the best schedule. Where the goal in this case is something like, I want to maximize my total coverage. I want to make sure that if I have a certain number of orders coming in per hour, that I have a schedule that aligns with those number of orders so that there's always somebody on hand. Obviously, the specifics are going to depend on your business, but it's a useful way of thinking through and automatically identifying potential solution schedules. And the kind of way to start with this is always to think about the problem clearly, right? Like to think about, well, my own workforce is 10 people. And if I put them into a simulation like this, what are the things that I care about? Is it about minimizing downtime? Is it about trying to minimize costs? And when you set those parameters, you can then run a simulation, which is really just a model plus time. It's thinking about a model running over a series of time steps to represent minutes or hours or days, and finding an optimized set of schedules that leads you to the goal that you want. And so, yeah, hopefully this will be kind of a concrete representation of how you can use predictive modeling to help on your own employee scheduling. But one thing that I think is always important to take away is you should 80-20 any of these kinds of things. Like if your own workforce is small and you're trying to just figure out, well, I want to make sure that there's always somebody on staff, especially during peak times, then I think your best bet is just to start doing kind of manual plotting of this. But as the workforce gets more complex, then you can really start bringing in some of the tools that I know Workforce has, but also some of the external tools like Hash provides for thinking through more of the problem and trying to optimize for specific metrics.
Yeah, I definitely think it's a conversation of first we talk about what we're trying to do. And at its simplest level, we're trying to schedule 2 people for every X amount of sales in 15 minutes or in an hour or something. And if we can hit that first, then I think we're in a really good spot to at least, hone in on a percentage of that cost that we're looking to allocate. And then as you build it from there, we can talk about how do we better get in more of that sales data? How do we understand the different impacts that the data will have from alternative areas?
That's totally right. I feel like a failure
kind
mode.
Of like,
sorry, not to cut you off, but no,
no, it's okay.
I got excited because I want to +1 this. I feel like a failure mode that people have when it comes to analytics is that they're like seeing the shiniest tool possible, and they like try to go for that first instead of just getting the basics down. And the basics are where you get a huge amount of the value.
Once you get that base down, then build it out from there. And
exactly. One thing that I've seen working at Hash, and so I work on the simulation engineering team where I lead some of our efforts, and a lot of that is forward deployed engineering, trying to help customers leverage Hash in the best possible way. And I will say, like, we've built a cool tool, but one of the things I often find myself saying is just like, you're going to get a huge amount of value from just having a clean data set that you can poke around with and play around with in Excel.
Yes.
And once you have that, then you start thinking a little bit more about simulations and modeling and predictive modeling. But that clean foundation will bring you a far way, get you most of the way there.
Yep. Couldn't agree more. That's a lot of our struggle too. When you're getting data from unclean sources, a lot of the times it might lead you down the wrong path.
Totally.
So I think we can also talk, I think this slide's pretty relevant to what we're discussing, which is the importance of that data-driven technology. First and foremost, the time that it takes to schedule when you don't have those resources or the idea in order, and you're just picking shifts off a schedule or going off of, a whim. You're spending a lot of extra time. So that administrative burden that's not even factored into those kind of ratios. But 2, you're losing out on all the future trends and things that we were talking about. We've got a poll up on the screen right now, which is around what percentage of your technology is data-driven. So I know a lot of businesses, we're going to hover around the 50% or so. A lot of manual decisions are still being made based off intuition. I don't know if you have any experience with the customers you work with at Hash. In that regard.
Yeah, I think one thing that I notice where I feel like people are most effective at using, broadly put, like data-driven technology or predictive analytics, the companies that seem most effective at utilizing them treat them as a input to the decision-making process as opposed to a substitute for the decision-making process. And by that, I mean, it's something like the intuitions you've built up as a manager or a business owner tend to be pretty good. Like, they're sussing out things that are important to keep in mind. And it's something like if you treat simulations or other analytics as a input that just help you refine your intuitions, I think that those businesses seem to work better than the ones that either completely ignore the data and are just going by gut, or the ones that do the opposite and are like, well, the computer told us to do X, so we're going to do X. It is still something like a balance between the two, and these kind of tools are like a good complement.
Yes. Right. Yeah, I do think that maybe we sometimes in all of the data-driven conversations, we kind of lose out too that, you can always have that human interference. And, if you think that things are going to be slightly different than what the models are telling you, then, you have that opportunity as a business owner and a business manager.
Yeah, to like interrogate it and figure out like, all right, why does my intuition disagree? And am I right in this case, or is the model we've built right? And that's, it can, I like the trend. And I think Workforce has done a good job of this. And it's something we're also kind of aspiring to with Hash, which is interpretability, which is another buzzword that gets thrown around. But yeah, like really being able to understand, well, why is the data pointing me in this direction? What are the inputs to this model or to this data that is giving this answer? And once you have that, you can both understand, like, all right, is the data wrong or am I wrong, and do it in a way that, like, really moves you forward as opposed to being
right. Maybe you're just missing part of the puzzle.
Yeah.
And the intuition, that's what's telling you is off, and this things that you're putting into the data is not yet quite the full picture, and your intuition allows you to kind of identify.
Yeah, totally.
So we also have a cool graphic example of employee scheduling in action. So this is actually from our platform. What you're basically seeing here is your scheduling needs go against the sales data. The blue in the background is the predicted sales, and then the red is going to be that actual. So I think an important thing to remember too with data is we try and get as close to possible with the forecast being close, but you're always going to have a little bit of difference in that. And so it's how you utilize the tools that your business has to make on-time decisions to make changes. So if you know that your forecasts and your actuals in a given day are deviating away from what you originally anticipated, then you have the opportunity to send people home. So definitely utilizing resources like that to make sure that when things go different from the forecast, we have the opportunity to make changes.
Yeah, and let me just quickly ask, is this something where you can put into Workforce the like real actuals on like an ongoing basis? Is this something you can like stream in from a data source, or is it something people kind of manually enter?
Yeah, no, it definitely, depending on what your sales data, where it's being taken in from, we definitely take that information from companies like Square, who can give us real-time insights into how our businesses are doing. So
nice.
Yeah. So I think we're just about out of time. So I don't know if you wanted to wrap us up, Meredith.
Yeah, definitely. So, that was really awesome, you guys. Thank you again for coming on. I know I learned a lot, and I'm sure that our audience can take something away from this as well. As you can see on the bottom left, there is a little pop-up for our survey. It will just help you gauge just how prepared your organization, your company is for scheduling changes. With it, you get a chance to win a $100 Amazon gift card, which is great. Everybody loves that. It'll only take a minute of your time, and we'll be sure to get back to you with results if you're the winner. So keep an eye out on those inboxes. And yeah, without further ado, we'll see you at the next one.
Awesome. Thanks, Meredith. Thank you, Ben.
Guys for coming
Thanks,
on.
y'all. This was a lot of fun.